quarterback carousel. So this news dropped Sunday morning, and it's a perfect time to bury this type of story if you're the Indianapolis Colts because, well, no one's going to be talking about your team when the Super Bowl is about to be played, but the Colts apparently are going to either trade or release quarterback Carson Wentz. So let's add Wentz into the conversation, into this quarterback carousel. Indy could be a team that could be this year's Rams. So they could be a quarterback away from being a legitimate Super Bowl contender. So you throw Wentz in the mix, you throw Rodgers in the mix, Russell Wilson, Jimmy Garoppolo, Derek Carr, maybe Kyler Murray, certainly Deshaun Watson, and there's a chance for more movement this offseason than in any NFL offseason in the past. Factor in Tom Brady left and won a ring. Now Matt Stafford left and won a ring. You might see teams being more aggressive than ever before trying to get a stud quarterback because they realize the only way to win is if you got that guy under center.
I'd also like to, in the light of the way the Colts have talked about Carson Wentz, I'd like to say that I'm either going to win the lottery or keep showing up for work. You guys guess on which one's going to happen. It's probably going to be keep showing up for work. Okay?
Bummer.
They're going to release Carson Wentz. Ain't nobody trading for Carson Wentz.
You don't think so?
No.
Like a day 3 pick? I mean, Carson Wentz's contract isn't great, but there is an out after next season. So, like, you give up a day 3 draft pick, you get Carson Wentz for a year. If it works out, great. You already have him on a contract. If it doesn't work out, you can cut him for $0 in 2023. I don't think there's any team out there that'd be willing to take that risk.
I'd fire my general manager if he traded for Carson Wentz.
Okay.
Like I'd just be like, oh, that's the trade you made? Oh, can we get that vetoed? No, we can't. All right, you're fired. You're fired. You can't trade for Carson Wentz. Now, you talk about Rodgers, you talk about Wilson, Deshaun Watson. Like, we know Deshaun Watson's moving. Like, unless something awful happens with the legal situation, which, by the way, it's on the horizon that Deshaun Watson, as well as various people associated with Watson and the cases that are against him, he's going to get deposed here pretty soon unless settlements start showing up. So there's going to be some sort of advancement from the off-the-field standpoint on Deshaun Watson. But we all know Deshaun Watson's getting moved. It's the Rodgers and Wilson thing that could very much complicate Deshaun Watson, because if you could get Russell Wilson, if you could get Aaron Rodgers, you might prefer those guys to Deshaun Watson if you're a team that feels like, hey, 2022 is the year we have to absolutely crush it. And so we're going to go for the guys that we know have a much better chance of playing 17 games than Deshaun Watson does.
I think the Wentz news is good news, by the way, for the Texans. The more teams that need quarterbacks, the better. It drives up the price of Watson. But specifically with the 3rd overall pick, the more teams that need quarterbacks, there's not going to be every team that's able to upgrade a quarterback this offseason. Mm-hmm. There's not enough really good quarterbacks. So then maybe someone falls in love with one of these quarterbacks and is willing to move up to number 3, let's say, to go and get that guy.
Someone pulls a San Fran. They have a guy. Maybe they want to go get a different guy.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about all of these quarterbacks potentially moving this offseason, but half of the guys that we're talking about might stay put.
Mm-hmm.
Aaron Rodgers, I think more than likely he is staying in Green Bay. There's definitely a chance Russell Wilson stays in Seattle. There's definitely a chance Kyler Murray stays in Arizona. There's definitely a chance that Derek Carr stays in Vegas. So we're all talking about how there's potentially major movement coming up this offseason at the quarterback position, but that might not be the case. And if that is the case, where there's not a lot of quarterbacks getting traded this offseason, then that also could drive up the demand for Deshaun Watson, because it's not a great draft class for quarterbacks. We've talked about that. Not a great free agency class for quarterbacks either. So if you want to get a franchise-changing type of quarterback, more than likely you're going to have to trade for that this offseason. And I don't know how many of these guys are actually going to be available to trade for.
BK, you laid out a scenario where the Texans might get the double dip on the lack of QBs available. Deshaun Watson is the only big-time QB making a move via trade. And by big-time, I mean there's really only 3 guys that are in consideration for being moved, and they're in the big-time category. It's Rodgers, Wilson, and Deshaun. Let's say Rodgers and Wilson stay put. Deshaun's the only big-time guy on the move. And then they get the haul from that. Some teams like, all right, well, we got to go trade up for a quarterback. And then they get the haul out of the 3, and they get the double dip on the lack of QB movement. Man, that would be incredible for Nick Caserio and company over there at NRG Stadium.
If you're the Texans, if you're a Texan fan, root for Rodgers to stay in Green Bay. Root for Russell Wilson to smooth things over in Seattle. And then Deshaun Watson's clearly the most valuable asset that could be acquired this offseason, even with the suspension and baggage with the legal situation unresolved to this point. He's 26 years old. He led the NFL in passing in his last full season. He had taken 2 teams to the playoffs previously with poor offensive line. I mean, Deshaun Watson, people forget because he hasn't played this past year, but he was legitimately a top 5 quarterback his last full season in the league. and that guy becomes available with the demand of the position, you're going to get a lot for him. And then, Cody, as you talked about the double dip, then you take some of the Watson picks and you trade back with that. Or maybe it's the real, Kachunga scenario where a team wants to come all the way up to number 3 and move heaven and earth to get their quarterback of the future. So, we talked about earlier how far away are the Texans. If they execute a Watson trade and then a successful draft day trade to get even more picks, it can happen pretty quick if Caserio is as good at picking players as he was in his first draft.
Look, as it stands right now, you're still working from an overall draft pick standpoint. Over the past few seasons, you're still working from a net negative compared to a lot of other teams. A Watson trade could get you to a positive, or could get you even, and then a trade from the number 3 back could get you into the positive category where you're ahead and you've got more overall assets in a time period than most teams get in that scenario. And when you have the lack of talent that the Texans have, you almost have to hope that scenario pops up. Even just getting even from an overall standpoint is great. But if you could surpass that and have an excess amount so that you could start backfilling some of those spots that are less talented, gosh, that would go such a long way to relevancy in the AFC South, because that's the first step. And then it's relevancy in the AFC, and then you can start worrying about relevancy in the NFL.
Just getting a bunch of young players on rookie contracts, right? That's a recipe for success, to where you can just start to pick and choose what free agents you want to fill holes on your team. That'd be the best case scenario if the Texans have a bunch of draft capital, which they haven't had over the last few years, like you said, Cody, but they also strike gold with those draft picks too. Yeah, that obviously expedites the process.
What's your gut tell you right now on Rodgers? Stay or go?
Stay.
I also feel stay, even though I've been heavily into the go category. Feels like Green Bay is going to do every single thing in their power.
As they should.
And he was talking up the Packers organization at the NFL Honors last week.
Yes, he was.
I mean, actions speak louder than words, but guys, didn't that feel like the nicest Aaron Rodgers has been to Green Bay in years?
Without a
praising
doubt.
the GM, praising the owner, dedicating the award to Ted Thompson. Like, he was giving the Packers all sorts of love. So maybe that means things have smoothed over up there.
Russell Wilson, what's your gut tell you? Stay or go?
I would have thought go, but then I heard him do a lot of interviews this past week. I think he stays.
Go.
I very much believe go, because there's a chance he's on the 4th best team in his own division. I very much believe go.
Yeah, but he's not going to look at it like that, I don't think. I think if Pete Carroll stays, and it seems like by all accounts he will, I think he could be convinced for one more year together. All he had the injury this year was a wash year. One more kick of the can for Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll together.
Man, Jake, I hope you're right, because if both those guys stay,
I know
everybody is going to be lining up for Deshaun Watson. Somebody's going to make a mistake and not line up for Deshaun Watson when they should be lining up for Deshaun Watson.
There'll be a surprise, though. Matt Stafford wasn't supposed to be available this past offseason. That kind of came out of nowhere. That happened when the season was still being played a year ago. Happened on January 31st of last year.
Yep.
I wonder if, because Stafford happened, we won't be surprised by another Stafford situation.
No, I'm almost expecting it at this point.
Correct.
Right? Like, we're talking about teams who could make that trade to acquire their Matt Stafford. So I think a lot of teams are going to plan for that. And, yeah, at this point, I don't think you could be surprised if something like that goes down.
Like, I mean, if Derek Carr got moved, like, that's a Stafford situation. Some team's trying to go get him because he's kind of hit the ceiling with the Raiders, and they're trying to, get him through there. Or, I mean, I don't know. Is Kirk Cousins in that category? Is somebody going to think Kirk Cousins is the next Matt Stafford?
Teams keep thinking it.
Sure.
It's happened with multiple teams over the years, so maybe somebody else will get duped.
If Kyle did it, I'd buy in. If Shanahan and the 49ers did it, I'd buy in.
I mean,
you know what? Kirk Cousins, he's been unfairly criticized these past 2 years. Shanahan knows what he's doing.
What about Matt Ryan?
Well, I mean, honestly, he's ahead of Stafford in a lot of these counting stats. He's the new Stafford. He's the counting stats guy without the ring.
Hear me out here for Kirk Cousins, a team with recent quarterback ineptitude. They've had kind of a revolving door at the position, likely in the market for a quarterback that could really use him. Washington. Perfect fit for Kirk Cousins.
It's a new name. It's a new day, Kirk Cousins. They might force the owner out. What do you think? You want to come back?
I bet I can Photoshop a jersey on him real quick. No problem at all.